You can look at a new governorship as a frontier. In some ways, how do you feel about that?
It is a new frontier, and I enjoy it immensely. I enjoy the opportunities that I'm faced with every day. I absolutely love every day being a governor.
Being governor in a time of turmoil, from Medicaid expansion to dealing with the biggest budget gap in state history. An analysis of the governor's first 8 months on the job.
Sponsorship for Frontiers with Rhonda McBride is provided by Kupik Corporation and Spenard Builders Supply. Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to Frontiers. The Alaska Constitution gives the governor some of the strongest executive powers in the nation, powers that Bill Walker hasn't hesitated to use during his first 8 months in office. We'll have more about that, but first, some numbers from a recent poll. Every 3 months, Ivan Moore checks the pulse of Alaska voters and says the governor continues to grow in popularity. Over the course of a year, the number of people who feel positive about him has doubled compared to a slight increase in negative responses.
The feel that Walker gives people is more along the lines of an Egan, Hammond, kind of the historical governors, Wally Hickel even maybe, who just went down there and did what they felt was right, and politics be damned.
Moore says he's watching to see how these numbers hold up, especially if the Walker administration tries to raise taxes or tap into permanent fund earnings. Well, for now, let's rewind the clock back to December 1st, when Bill Walker crossed into his own personal new frontier.
I do solemnly swear.
I do solemnly swear
That I will support.
For his swearing in, Governor Bill Walker used a Bible that's been in the family for more than 200 years, a symbol of Walker's keen sense of history and a thread throughout his political career.
Duties.
and I will faithfully discharge my duties.
On this day, Bill Walker became the second Alaskan-born governor to serve. Bill Egan was the first, a governor who was one of Walker's first role models. They crossed paths in 1963 when Egan went to Valdez for the arrival of the Chilkat, the first ferry to serve the Alaska Marine Highway. A big celebration, and Bill Walker, who was only 12 years old, was there. Fast forward to January 19th, the day we visited the governor just before the start of the legislature. Appropriate because Bill Walker was well on his way to becoming the rainy day governor. Before he arrived for our interview, we got a look at his office, bare, no time for personal touches save this family photo.
The load gets a little heavier as the price of oil goes down,
Causing a budget gap then estimated at $3.5 billion.
no one expected it was going to go as low as it's gone. It's gone down as low as, I think, $45, as low as I've seen, so that's pretty unprecedented.
A rainy day governor headed into a rainy day session.
No one on the dock at Valdez will survive.
We are all who we have been. In other words, our background makes us who we are.
A defining moment in Bill Walker's life, rebuilding after the 1964 earthquake, which wiped out his family home in Valdez.
This is what I learned from my parents. Don't panic when times are tough. Make a plan. Stick to it. Stay focused. Stay positive. And get to work.
The message to lawmakers at his State of the State speech, not to panic over the budget gap.
This legislative body,
And at his State of the Budget address, the governor remained positive.
I like to think of myself as a carpenter with a law degree. And in my toolbox are dozens of tools.
Walker told lawmakers raising revenue was not among the tools he was ready to use.
I believe that he's on the right track. I don't know this man very well. I don't know whether he's trustworthy. That'll all develop over the next few months and years.
And then this one was framed for us.
With help from his wife, Donna, the governor's office finally has a moved-in feeling. With art from Fred Macantons, an old family friend, as well as this painting commissioned for the inauguration.
And then this one is called My First Bold Move.
The painting harkens back to the days when Bill Walker lived in this cabin in Delta Junction, not too long before this picture was taken. Call it an early lesson in risk management.
So this is in the middle of the winter, I think 40, 50 below. And he was about 5 years old and had to go to the outhouse. And so which he did. As he came out of the outhouse, a herd of bison had moved in between he and the cabin. And so he said his first big decision was, well, do I stay here with certain death and freeze, or do I make my way through that herd?
Walker made it back to the cabin.
Bill is fearless.
Fearless in a way that frustrated the Republican majority, especially over the governor's push to expand Medicaid.
We know that the cost of Medicaid at this point is unsustainable in Alaska, period.
So as a governor, this is a pretty heavy lift because you have a Republican majority that for the last few years has not even wanted to put this on the table.
The momentum across the state has been overwhelming as far as the support and reaching out.
And I'd like to ask our senators and representatives one question. What would Jesus have you do?
Despite growing public pressure, the majority resisted. And after insisting the governor give them a Medicaid bill, they refused to take it up.
I am absolutely shocked.
Another big battle?
This flies in the face of everything the state stands for.
House Republicans introduced a bill blocking the governor's plan to expand a backup natural gas pipeline project.
I'm shocked that it got this many sponsors. I really question who these people work for.
The governor was totally out of line in making that statement.
Democrats turned out to be the governor's strongest ally.
I think we need to give Governor Walker some latitude on this and try to move forward with his vision of how we get a gas line done.
Another ugly fight, legislative confirmation of the governor's cabinet. Walker feared foul play.
Paranoia, you pick a name you want to use, but I think if you'll ask most of the people around this building, when I give somebody my word, I don't believe I've ever broke my word to people in this building. That's just not how I operate.
You know, I'm not paranoid. I'm concerned. I'm concerned that I see a legal opinion that gives them a way around a process of putting the 90 conferees up to a vote.
You talked about when you were a little boy, you were at the outhouse, and you discovered when you came out that there was a herd of buffalo. Does what's going on this session remind you of that experience?
You know, this is a much friendlier looking group than the buffalo. I think we have a healthy relationship. I think the good news, I think we're all focused on the same destination. So the roads of how we get there might be a little bit different, but I'm very comfortable. So no, the experience with the buffalo and the outhouse at age 5 was much more terrorizing than what we're dealing with today. Today, Alaska becomes the 30th state to accept the benefits of Medicaid expansion.
In the end, the governor decided to bypass the legislature and enact Medicaid expansion on his own.
This is the final option for me. I've tried everything else. And one thing people have to learn about me, I never give up.
Did the legislature let you down by not giving it a full vetting during the special session?
Well, we had over 30 hearings. I don't know what other piece of legislation received 30 hearings.
The gamble for the governor? Will his end run around the legislature poison the well for the next session, which has another multi-billion-dollar budget gap to tackle, a fix likely requiring new taxes or tapping permanent fund earnings? One of the things that you've always said is that you're a carpenter.
Mm-hmm. Still am. I am very proud of that.
You have various tools to work with. One of the tools that keeps getting put out there is drawing from the permanent fund earnings, not the corpus, but the earnings. Do you think it's time to tap the earnings?
I think we have to look at the whole menu of options out there and find out which one does what. We have to look at the permanent fund. We have to look at income tax. We have to look at all these things and say what makes sense.
If you think of it like gambling a little bit and you look at a slot machine, since you took office, all the lemons are lined up low oil prices, and now the latest lemon, the fact that we're going to see cuts to the military.
Well, we're going to turn those lemons into lemonade, and we're going to turn the economy around and make sure that we have a sustainable future.
You can look at a new governorship as a frontier.
In
some ways, how do you feel about that?
It is a new frontier, and I enjoy it immensely. I enjoy the opportunities that I'm faced with every day. I absolutely love every day being in governor because there's so many opportunities in this state.
Turning crisis into opportunity, the challenge for every governor who has occupied this White House of the North. Now, some of you may wonder why we made no mention of the Lieutenant Governor, Byron Mallott. Well, it turns out we profiled him on our very first show, so you can go to the Frontier section of our website, ktva.com, to watch that. And we also have an extended interview with Governor Walker. So what did Bill Walker say was the best thing that happened since he took office? Well, the birth of his two grandsons, Walker Ross Linderman, born in January, and Leo Jordan Walker, who arrived in March. They're being held by their cousins Mara and Porter Hobson. Up next, more on what could be the most challenging frontier yet for the governor, finding new ways to pay for state government.
We're going to turn those lemons into lemonade, and we're going to turn the economy around and make sure that we have a sustainable future.
We asked veteran political observers to weigh in. Just how different is the Walker administration really? We have two guests today, and joining me here at the table, Tim Bradner, who is the natural resources expert at the Alaska Journal of Commerce. And we also have Christopher Clark, who joins us from Juneau. Chris has been a longtime observer of Alaska politics as a journalist and a staffer in Governor Palin's office, as well as a legislative aide. So, Tim, let's start out with you, because one of the things that I want to take a look at is this photoshopped image that ran in the Alaska Journal of Commerce on the front page at the start of the legislature. You see the gambling dogs painting with the faces of all the players in there. You think that that was somewhat prescient, a foreshadowing of what was to come?
Well, Rhonda, every legislative session is really a big card game, but this seemed very apropos at the time. This particular illustration was kind of the inspiration of our editor, Andy Jensen, but very creatively executed by Nadia Gilmore, our production graphics designer.
Well, I have to ask, Chris, when you saw that, what did you think?
I thought it was one of the best covers I've ever seen. It captured the sense of high-stakes poker that every legislative match is like and that all Alaska politics is like. So I thought it was a masterful cover.
Well, of course, you know, the governor was new at this poker game, Tim.
Well, he was, and some people say he played, some say he played his cards not so well. I would have to say that if I were to give the governor a few kind of grades, and Chris, you can weigh in on this, but I would say he was dealt a terrible hand at the start of the session, walking into such a huge budget situation. He pulled that off very well. I think people, even legislators, gave him credit for how they handled it. Came in with a budget that was reduced, recognizing going to have to draw down on savings, but tried to do targeted reductions, very wisely done, without wrecking the economy. Very much on the public stage. Also had a good budget director behind him, Pat Pitney.
So where do you give him lower grades?
I would give him an A on that particular, how he handled the budget. I would give him a kind of maybe a C or a D on his legislative relations. And I think that's simply because he's new and he's learning. He's in Governor 101. And I think he's learned now. I think he'll do better next session. Let me give you a couple of quick illustrations of I think were mistakes that were made. He didn't realize that you can't just pop off about things. You can't make some major policy announcement in a newspaper column or a speech or something like that. You've got to the legislature is your partner, and I don't think he really quite understood that in the beginning.
Well, some governors have trouble understanding that. Others do better. Chris, what do you think about this dance with the legislature? You step on a lot of feet.
Well, that is inevitable. First years are always difficult for new governors as they transition from campaign mode to governance. And he's survived this first 8 months, and in many ways, although the issues may get more difficult, some of the greater challenges are now behind him because he now has a structure in place to which to respond to all the issues that are going to arise. To echo what Tim said, yes, he does deserve high marks for coming out with budget cuts, including taking off the table the one-time funding for education that many education advocates had wanted. When he made daring moves like that, he really did help pave the way for a resolution on the budget, including the $30 million cut to help pay for labor agreements. That too came from the administration. And I also like to echo that Pat Pitney, the governor's budget director, is probably one of the bright shining stars he has in his cabinet and in his office. So I think that's been a plus. But he has made mistakes which are inevitable, such as when he came out with his opinion piece announcing he was going to have a backup plan for the gas project. And that caught many people by surprise. And I think as much of it because of the content of the idea, but also in the way that it was announced. And the way he had, of course, before the session began, had fired 3 members of the Alaska Gasline Development Corporation Board and then created a whole furor based on that. So there were a lot of missteps, which are in many ways inevitable for any first governor in a first legislative session. Since then, he's been working on mending relationships, having good rapport with legislators. And in fact, I hear from several of them say they've never had access to a governor like this one. This one has been, Governor Walker has been receptive to talking to legislators one-on-one about their issues. And that to me is a promising sign. It harkens back to the days of Governor Bill Egan, who was also famous for working with legislators one-on-one. So I think there's a lot of promise there. Yes, there were a lot of missteps, and I think they are learning from those missteps, they being the governor and his administration, and they're moving forward. So we'll see if this pays off, especially as we approach another special session or another legislative session.
Well, Chris, I want to talk about that just a little bit. Here he did an end run around the legislature on Medicaid expansion, and come next session, he faces another multi-billion-dollar deficit. And, has he poisoned the well for his next session with some of these moves?
Well, I wouldn't say that he did an end run around the legislature. He did give the legislature a chance to approve Medicaid expansion, and then when they refused to decide on that issue, he did it unilaterally. Yes and no in terms of relationships. In many ways, I'm sure some legislators are almost relieved to see this issue behind them so they can then tackle the other more pressing ones, such as a revenue plan and hopefully advance the gas project. So I think there may be a mixed blessing with getting Medicaid expansion out of the way. Clearly, Medicaid reform still must be done, and the governor has hired a consultant to come up with plans in January and in later the year on how to advance Medicaid reform. Meanwhile, the legislature is doing the same. So I think in many ways, maybe it was good to get this off the table.
Well, Tim, I wanted to ask you about the Alaska LNG project, liquefied natural gas project. He's going to have to come up with a plan next session with lawmakers, and supposedly there's been this review of the project going on by his administration. And I think the lawmakers are very nervous, the Republican majority, about what he's doing.
Well, I think that's right, and the governor has not been very transparent about that up until now. But you have to recognize that he's negotiating with these large companies, and you can't do that in quite to the public. So he's got to keep the details of a lot of that confidential for now.
Well, one of the things he did is earlier this summer he went up to the North Slope, and the producers gave him a tour. Is that a sign that he may be taking maybe a broader view than he has in the past of things?
Maybe it is. I think it's good that he went there. He'd never been there before. He'd never actually seen it. He dealt with it sort of at a distance. He was a lawyer for attorney.
Fighting them
He'd been
in
suing
lawsuits.
them and suing them in court and things like that. But to be actually up there, I think he had a great time. I think he's kind of a, this guy has a real good, solid blue-collar craftsman background, and I think he really loved being there around machinery and see things being done like that. Wearing a hard hat. It was a great experience.
One other thing I wanted to talk about before we run out of time is, he's got a huge load ahead of him. He has got to come up with some revenues, and that means either new taxes of some kind. Now, he held a conference earlier this year as well to try to get Alaskans to look at this idea up in Fairbanks. How hard is that going to be? Are his poll numbers going to plunge once he starts talking about tapping the permanent fund dividend. We just have a little bit of time left.
Oh, they probably will, but I think you got to give this guy credit for at least being willing to talk about this. I mean, few politicians have had the courage to talk about the T word or the use of permanent fund earnings.
The T word.
Well, what do you think, Chris?
I think, well, that's spot on, and the governor plans to have more public forums on this to help build the groundswell for some kind of revenue approach or solution. One question I would ask everyone is, who remembers the territorial legislature of 1949? That legislature had to have a special session before they even convened in their first session to pass an income tax because the state was facing a major fiscal gap. Well, they passed an income tax and the state didn't fall into the red and life went on. So I'm wondering how much of it we are hyperventilating now because of the difficulties of the present, but once something is enacted, we will quickly forget about all the controversy and then move on to the next one.
We have to wrap it up, but we will come back to this on our website. We'll carry on the conversation there in a web extra. So I want to thank both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Renewable energy, island style. Next, we take you to Kodiak for a preview of what we're working on for next week's show. And Frontiers is your show too. We have photos of a commercial fishing boat and a handwritten letter to share when we come back. Kodiak leads the world in green energy technology, one of only 3 communities in the country that run almost 100% renewable energy. Well, next week, explore Kodiak's 2 sources of clean energy, water and wind. We land on a remote lake for a tour of the Terror Lake Hydro Plant, the workhorse for decades. See how Kodiak Electric Association puts natural resources to work in the most efficient way in the world. A win-win, great for the environment, and $7 million in savings.
Everybody needs power. Energy is so important, it's basic to human life. Almost, well, not almost, but getting up there with water and air, it seems, anymore. But we just had an opportunity to do something real in the sustainable area, and I think we've accomplished that.
The head of the Kodiak Electrical Association says that he gets calls from around the world every day wanting to know more about their success story. And we'll show you how they do it next week on Frontiers. Well, we love it when you send your photos to Frontiers. Better yet, we love to share them. This one comes from Kurt Cosbrook, a day of commercial fishing in Chignik Lagoon. This is the vessel Miranda Lee. And we got our very first viewer letter from Joanne out of Palmer. Thank you so much for your kind words, and we always welcome your suggestions. Please write or email us with those suggestions, and if you want to share a photo, visit the Frontiers section of KTVA, where you can find past programs, web extras, and photo galleries. And thanks again for being a part of our weekly exploration of new frontiers. We hope that you've enjoyed the journey. And until next time.